guess you could say, the third workshop that we've put on for January's National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And I'm Tamiko Chacon. I'm with an organization called Everyone Free, which is an anti-human trafficking organization based here in Pomona and based out of Purpose Church. And then we work in partnership with several organizations, but one of them is Project Sister, which serves victims of sexual assault here in Pomona and through the Inland Valley. And so we've been working together to build an anti-human trafficking task force for the Inland Valleys. And so we joined forces for this month to put on this series of workshops to raise awareness and to educate about human trafficking. So welcome, and we're really glad you're here tonight. We have a really special guest. Her name is Erika Sethi, and she has her master's in social work. And she is going to be teaching us tonight about caring for those who are victims of trauma. And so this is extremely important for all of us as we serve victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. But I'm sure what Erika is going to be sharing with us also will apply to many other populations, anybody who's a victim of trauma for that matter. So welcome, Erika. I've asked her just to share just really briefly a little bit about herself, her background, before she dives into her presentation. But Erika, we are virtually giving you a applause, and take it away.
Thank you, Tamiko. Thank you guys for having me this evening. I'm excited to join. I've been listening in the last couple of weeks, and all of the knowledge has been such a wealth, and I'm excited to kind of add to that tonight. So I did prepare a PowerPoint that I'll go ahead and open now. Let's see. So this is what I'm calling an overview of trauma and healing work. So my introduction, as Tamiko just said, my name is Erika Sethi. I do have my master's in social work, and I'm also an associate clinical social worker. I'm currently working as a clinical therapist with San Bernardino County Department of Behavioral Health. And I have previous experience with Los Angeles County Probation Department with the Pomona Unified School District. So I was a probation officer for middle school and high school students in Pomona. So I'm kind of familiar with your area that you guys are working in. I do have specialized training in adult and child mental health with a focus on trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, strengths-based modalities, child abuse, and ACEs. So I know you might look at those and say, what the heck is that? Don't worry about it. We'll kind of learn a little bit more together tonight. My presentation, I'm going to try and make sure we are on a time limit, and there's a lot to cover with trauma. We can be here for hours. So I tried to do my best to fit in what I thought would be useful in your guys' work, but also just in general. The first part of my presentation kind of focuses on what is trauma, and from a clinician standpoint, what is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm going to kind of introduce that, but the primary objective is really to learn what it is so that we can then use that knowledge to work with people. So obviously we're not all clinicians. We don't need to know the definitions of trauma, but it does help us to be able to kind of pick some things up when we're working with people. So I'll go ahead and just jump in. And then if you have questions, please feel free to jot them down, take notes, or put them in the chat. So we are going to be monitoring the chat as well. All right. So at the broadest level, trauma-informed care means that services have an awareness and sensitivity to the way in which clients' presentation and service needs can be understood in the context of their trauma history. Okay, so this is kind of the universal definition of trauma-informed care. So what does that mean? So trauma is how the body stores abuse. So this is something that is really important to know. It's how when something happens to us, so trauma is a powerful emotional response to a distressing event. So that's why you hear such as war, an accident, unexpected loss of a loved one, or abuse. Trauma can continue to cause both emotional and physical symptoms for many years after the event has concluded. And so this is the definition that we use when diagnosing trauma. We also consider that there's different exposure levels. So either directly witnessing the trauma, witnessing it happening to others, learning of an event happening to a loved one. So you don't even have to be on the receiving end of that abuse, or experiencing repeated or extreme exposure or adverse details of traumatic events. So this is where we have first responders or people that are working with people who have been through trauma, and you'll start to then store your own trauma, vicarious trauma, from what the people are reporting to you. You can let me know if I'm going too fast too, but this is more so just an overview. We'll kind of talk more in depth when we get to like, what does this mean for us? So we're talking about that trauma is not something we just get over. Studies show that childhood trauma actually changes the structure of the brain and emotional development. So the synapses of the brain is most active during the first 5 years of life. So if this is impacted on a child within their first 5 years of life, there's a stronger likelihood that that will change their brain structure and then their emotional development. So when we're thinking of synapses, we want to think of like a wiring of a home. When there's a disruption in this wiring, it stunts the emotional development. So think of like electric work, right? If you plug something into the wrong outlet, you're going to see a spark. So think of that kind of with our brain, like, and how we process trauma. What's important to know is that trauma that people don't see might have the biggest impact. So a lot of times you'll hear emotional abuse is sometimes more long lasting than physical. Bruises heal, but words can kind of last forever, right? And so kind of in knowing that, there's a thing called trauma bonding. So this is another form of trauma where the victim can become attached to the abuser. We're going to go into that a little bit further in a minute. And does someone have to undergo trauma to be at risk of exploitation or human trafficking? So I put no, but it is often more likely, right? So does every victim of human trafficking have to undergo trauma to have this exploitation happen to them? No, not always, but we do see a stronger likelihood, especially to sexual abuse with human trafficking.
Erika, you have a comment in the chat.
Okay, I can't, I don't know how to.
Don't worry about it. It says, it makes me think of the kids taken from their parents at the border.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's one of the big, things of our time. It's a huge impact. And, even people who have worked in the field, I had a licensed therapist one time tell me, well, kids don't remember. So it's more important that they have, if they have trauma when they're little, it doesn't matter as much, but when they're teenagers, they'll remember. And I was like, whoa, like, no, that's the opposite. So what we have found is that when kids endure trauma at an earlier age, they're more likely to have more symptoms than people that experience trauma later in life. So that being said, I did include kind of with PTSD and trauma, some of the common symptoms that we see when we're diagnosing. And that is that everyone's experience with trauma is unique. Some people will develop every symptom, while others develop very few. So acting out is a behavioral presentation of depression and trauma. An irritable mood is commonly found in depression, anxiety, PTSD, and eating disorders. So that's kind of interesting, right? We think of moodiness, people that are rude, people that are angry, and we don't think depression or trauma, but that's actually one of the most significant symptoms. So you will see on the right, in the white, it talks about like the common symptoms with PTSD. So intrusive, recurrent, involuntary thoughts, persistent avoidance or numbing, problems with concentration, negative beliefs of self, reckless behavior, detachment, avoidance of trauma reminders, including memories, flashbacks, exaggerated startle response, distressing dreams or other sleep problems, irritability, anger, or other negative emotions, and self-blame regarding the event. Sorry, I don't know how to switch slides. Bear with me. Okay, so what I mean by all that, let's kind of break it down a little bit. Protective factors, right? So when we see, when we have traumatic events, our stress and nervous systems are impacted with prolonged sense of fear. So think of like that fight or flight. We have that stress system, which triggers that we are not safe. So during high stress, our body's instinct is to seek safety. So we want to always remember too that things that once protected us may later cause harm. So a lot of times when you're in the traumatic event, when there is abuse, people tend to either do avoidance, minimizing, disassociation. How can I stop this trauma from happening? But what we see is that later in life, when the trauma is no longer occurring, people are still engaging in these protective factors. And now, instead of protecting them, they're actually causing more harm to them. So I have a quote by Dr. Bruce Perry, which if you guys are looking for more information on trauma, he is one of the leading child psychiatrists of our time. And he says that stress that is unpredictable, severe, prolonged leads to vulnerability. Stress that is predictable, moderate, and controlled leads to resiliency. So I threw this quote in here because I think too, often we think that if like all stress is bad, and that's not the case, right? So if it's predictable, if it's moderate, if we know what's going to happen, we can build resilience. But if we are kind of walking on eggshells, that's more dangerous. Okay. Okay. So a survival mode response to toxic stress increases your heart rate, your blood pressure, breathing, and muscle tension. The thinking brain is knocked offline and self-protection is the priority. So in other words, when someone is engaged in this high survival mode, they can't hear you, they're not going to respond. All they're thinking is just about safety. So what you'll see in the behavior of the person, the two common identifiers. So attention-seeking behavior, and that kind of, and then again, reaction-seeking behavior. So the difference that you'll notice in people's responses is either a history of poor attachment, low self-esteem, then they're seeking attention. If you start seeing reaction seeking, so people are telling you something to get a reaction out of you, that is an attempt to gain control. So I want you to kind of remember that when you hear people rude, mean, or dismissive, they may be triggered or lack self-awareness of how their actions are being perceived. When we're working with people, it is important to visualize the trauma they may have endured versus the behavior we currently see. So if you're working with someone who's endured significant trauma, kind of just knowing that it's not personal. Sometimes they might not even know that they come across like that, right? So if they're in a safety and survival mode, they're not going to be visualizing how you're responding to them. So something else I wanted to kind of touch on is adverse childhood experiences. These are called ACEs. So this was a CDC Kaiser Permanente study. It's one of the largest investigations of childhood abuse and neglect. And I brought it out today because I wanted to give you guys a broader example of what I'm talking about when I talk about child trauma. So the 3 types of ACEs include abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So we're talking physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and household dysfunction. So any parent with a mental illness or siblings, incarcerated relatives, mother treated violently or domestic violence, and substance abuse and divorce. How these impact you later in life. So what this study from Kaiser kind of found was that later in life, behavior that was common for trauma survivors was lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, and missed work. How this impacts our physical and mental health. So they saw increased patients with severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs and promiscuity, broken bones, COPD, stroke, cancer, and heart disease. So I kind of linked these in here because I think that it's really important when we're thinking of trauma to think of not only the emotional trauma, but how it affects our physical health as well. So here's the fun part. If trauma is this complex, how do we help? I want you guys to first know that the most important rule is to ensure we're not creating more harm. So trauma-informed care is the intention of being mindful of your actions and how they might trigger someone's trauma. I put in here that we want to avoid labeling. So an example of that would be, I'm working with prostitutes versus I'm working with women who engage in prostitution, right? Sounds a lot different. It also sounds a lot different from the person hearing you speak about what you do. And we kind of want to remember, adult behavior doesn't begin in adulthood. Rather, when you're working with adults, it's almost always about healing things they experienced as children. Okay. So we want to know your why. Openly explore your reason for doing this work. Why do you want to do it? What drew you to this work, and how you think you can be beneficial to survivors. We want to know your limitations and scope of practice. So this means if you're not a licensed therapist, you're not going to provide therapy. Just as if you're not a police officer, you're not going to arrest, right? So kind of knowing our limitations, knowing that our scope of practice, and when something is above our scope, kind of reaching out. It's okay to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. I don't have the solution. Let me find someone who does. Core values and beliefs mold our worldview, but not other people's worldview. So again, kind of what we've gone through is not exactly what maybe someone else has gone through. And then if you don't know, don't answer. Seek assistance when we don't know the answers. So I put in here, transparency is how much information you share, while vulnerability is the truth and meaning behind your actions and words. So we want to be transparent, but we also want to have that vulnerability so that they know that we have truth, meaning, and we do care. Okay. Does anyone, I can't see the chat, so I don't know, is there anything going on, or am I going too fast? How's everyone doing so far?
I think good. A lot of what you're saying is absolutely what we see in our girls. It's you are talking absolutely about the girls that we have. So it's very cool.
Well, and it's important to know, right? Like this is the work you guys are doing every day, but this can be your neighbor. This can be the clerk at the grocery store. This can be your friend who maybe hasn't shared this information with you yet. So just kind of knowing like our world is broken. And so if we know the warning signs, we're able to be better healers.
Nice.
Okay. So I'll keep going, and then we can do, there's a question and answer time at the end, and I can stay on if need be.
We have a comment in the chat saying, excellent presentation. It is so important to our church to take on being trauma informed to our community. And we have another comment saying excellent.
Oh, thanks, guys. So yeah, absolutely. Especially in the church, this is huge. The realm of mental health as Christians has sometimes gotten a bad rap, right? Just pray it away. But sometimes it's not always that easy. And so, yeah, in the church, again, that's another area that this is really impactful. So that kind of leads me into the next part. It's not our job to convince someone to change. It's our job to encourage them to hope and then empower them to be able to, empower them to be able to believe they can. So we are not in charge of making sure that everyone is healing. We're not in charge of their healing, but we have the beautiful opportunity to empower them, to make them believe again, to reopen that door of hope and to pray with them and walk this journey alongside of them. So kind of how do you do that? Again, know your mission statement and agency values. If you're working within the church, find out what your church believes about trauma, find out what your church believes about healing and therapy and mental health and all of these things. Ask questions. Again, I can't stress this enough, stay within your scope of practice. So I have found just in my work, this to be significantly important. I even get people who, want to help. They have the best interest at heart, but maybe it's not their scope. And so it can get very slippery to kind of say something that would go against what maybe the helping professional is advising. So we just want to be really careful to know our scope and what our role is in the healing process. So the client is always the expert on themselves, want to honor their truth. So remember, attention, again, kind of going back, attention-seeking behavior or elaborate stories is often rooted in trauma. We want to listen, never correct, assume, or minimize. So what's the most important thing to know is that you might not see the seeds we sow. You might not see their healing, but you are there to provide them the safe place to consider alternative outcomes. So when they're going in on, this elaborate story that you absolutely know is not true, that's okay. That's okay. Just, it's our job to be there and empower and support. Hopefully in time, you'll start to notice that they don't need to do that once they start feeling safe. Okay. So again, when you're present with a person, that person feels it, right? We've all been in a situation where you're engaging with someone and they're not listening, they don't care, maybe they don't have your best interests at heart, maybe they're waiting for their next response. We know, it's not something that you can't fake the funk. If you know, and a lot of times these survivors, they know. So sometimes when we don't have the answers, being present is enough. So I put in here, a dysregulated adult can never regulate a dysregulated child or kid. So this is also Dr. Bruce Perry. So what is he saying? Our capacity to work is based, oops, that's a spelling error. So it's based on how well you can stay regulated. So if our clients escalate and get mad, and we escalate and get mad, it doesn't work, right? We have to stay regulated so that we can then regulate them. An example of this is when someone's yelling, there's kind of studies showing that if you talk in a low voice, they lean in, they stop yelling, they're trying to hear what you're saying, it regulates them. But if you start yelling, then they're going to start yelling even more, right? And that doesn't even have to just lend itself to anger. That can be with any kind of emotion. So if we're regulated, they're going to notice, they're going to feel it, and they're going to be regulated. The variable that allows relational connection and healing is being present and not being distracted. So making sure that when we're doing this work, we're fully present. If you're not, I would advise, take some time off, or if you have something going on, let them know ahead of time. Let someone know, hey, I might have to step out during this session, but I'll be right back, right? So kind of letting them know. And then again, if your worldview is that the world is good, people are good, that's what you pay attention to. Just as if a person has a distorted worldview, they may see the negative, right? So if our view is that people are good, humanity is good, people want to help and love, Christ is good, that's our worldview. But if someone has endured a lifetime of trauma and being let down and poor attachment, they don't have that same view. They don't have that same view of hope in people. And so kind of lending ourselves to be present can help change their worldview versus us trying to tell them to change their worldview, right? You learn through actions, not through words. And when people do have different worldviews, it sets up a stage for miscommunication, right? We've all had that experience where we're like, but I was just trying to be nice. I don't know why they got mad. Or I was just trying to let them know that they acted like this. Maybe they didn't know I was trying to help them. And maybe they don't see it that way. So we want to just be careful that knowing other people's worldview can create that miscommunication, right? So don't expect people to know your intentions. Okay, so going along with this, we want to talk about intimacy and abandonment can be invoking triggering responses. So when you get deeper into disassociation and people begin to avoid and appear to be in compliance, but it's a fake compliance because they feel trapped and they have shut down their cortex because they're trying to study your expression to give you a correct response. So what do I mean? That's a lot of words. What I mean is that when somebody's triggered and they're in that disassociation, they're coming out of their body, but they have to please you. Maybe they need a service you're providing. Maybe they're court mandated to take your program. You might see that fake compliance. So what I kind of wanted to say in this is that it's not necessarily even within the realm of their control. And so just kind of being mindful that they might not know that they're kind of shutting down. Again, it's that safety. I can't hear you. I'm just trying to be safe, right? And so if we're being intimate, if we're asking them personal questions, then that creates that triggering response. So again, some people will feel safer away from you, but we want them to learn to feel safer in close proximity with intimacy, so we can give them the control and let them decide the dose. So what do I mean by that? Kind of opening the door for your services, but not forcing it, right? We never want to force someone to be intimate with their, the details of their life or their trauma, but letting them kind of come to you when they're ready to disclose. Okay. Another important part, using intentional language. So just as I kind of talked about avoiding labeling, we always want to make sure we're using intentional language and avoid speaking for someone. So an example of this, how do you view this experience versus, I can't believe that happened to you, how traumatic. Do you feel the difference in that? You're giving them the power to answer how they feel about something that happened to them. And you're not telling them how they should feel, because oftentimes they will deny that it was trauma. They'll say, no, I was fine. I didn't care, right? I didn't care when dad used to hit me. It didn't bother me. I was used to it, right? But if you're telling them, no, that's trauma, that could be doing more harm than letting them explain to you their experience.
Wow.
So you want to be mindful of your verbal and physical cues, examining why, the purpose behind your sharing. Why are you sharing? Are you sharing to create a reaction, Do you want them, like when we're sharing our own personal stories, right? Do we want them to feel bad? Do we want them to feel empathy? Are we sharing to normalize? Do we want them to know like, hey, I'm not different from you. I want you to feel connected, right? Are you oversharing? Remember, the focus is not us. It is our clients. So when you're doing this work, it is always our clients first. If you're getting some kind of reaction to the work, then maybe it's time for you to seek your own healing. But we always want to make sure that our clients are first. And then engage the client while maintaining them as a focal point of the teaching. So when we're sharing, making sure that they're always the focal point and it doesn't come back to us. Okay, so the next part says, do not unravel a person's history if we do not have the resources to do so. So what do I mean? If we're not equipped to open someone's trauma unless we're in a position to extend long-term extensive trauma therapy. So again, if they're coming to you and they're sharing a traumatic experience, that's one thing. But if we're actively seeking to unravel their history, if that's our intention behind our sharing, then that can be a dangerous game, right? And so if we're not equipped to provide that long-term extensive trauma therapy, then we can do more damage, because then it's another instance of where abandonment can come in. Now they've shared all their personal details with you, and maybe they won't even see you again, right? So like if we're doing intake assessments, if we're meeting a person for the first time, we want to be very mindful of how we gather that information. So we want to focus on strength-based approach versus needs approach. So what I mean by this is if you're telling someone, you need to come to therapy, you need to come to my service because I know what I can give you and you're going to benefit from it so much, right? Versus, wow, you have an amazing story. I'd love for you to come and share that in my group, right? It sounds different. And so, or a strengths base. So let's say someone never shares in group. Instead of saying, hey, I noticed you never shared. Why aren't you talking? You know, a strengths-based approach would focus on, I love that you've come to group every single week. Thank you for showing up. That's awesome, right? And so we want to make sure that we're always complimenting the strengths versus pointing out the needs. We want to focus on developing rapport and trust, discussing current stressors. So this is a way where you can kind of gather information about them without unraveling their trauma history. Hey, what's going on with you right now? Versus when you were 9 or 10 years old, were you sexually abused? It sounds different, right? So we want to make sure that we're very mindful of what's currently happening and not opening up anything that we can't kind of close in that same session. Want to encourage professional help often as needed. We want to ask what's going on and refrain from assumptions. So again, hey, let me think. So, hey, you were probably sexually abused, right? Is that how you got into this work? Or, hey, I know that you have a pimp that's making you do this, right? We want to focus on what do you need? Hey, how did you, what can I do to help you? What can I do to serve you today? What would help you to get out of this line of work, right? Sounds different. So we want to really be mindful and respect what their answer is. So if they say, I need, I don't know, a bus pass. Okay, we can maybe work on that, and you can redirect however you want to do it, but respecting that, not being like, well, I can't do that. So no, that's not what we do, right? So you want to respect their answers. Don't downplay what they're asking for. and ask how you can emotionally support them. So I love this, and especially like you guys brought up earlier with the church. Sometimes it doesn't need to be a monetary gain or a physical support. Sometimes just asking someone, hey, how can I emotionally support you? Can I pray for you if it's in a church realm? Can I check in on you, once a week? If you have a prayer chain, hey, how can we emotionally support you? That's really powerful. A lot of times I can't help because I don't have the money to help, or I don't have the time, right? And so, but I think we discredit what emotional support can do. And then the last one is building resilience and encouraging strength. So we really want to focus, again, instead of on the needs, we're focusing on the strengths. We're focusing on encouraging strengths and pointing out the positives. Okay, so this is kind of switching gears a little bit, but not too much. I wanted to throw this in here because I think this is really important with trauma and healing work, and being trauma informed. So knowing how we respond echoes their inner thoughts. So one's ability to comprehend is clouded by their inner thoughts. So shame, humiliation hurt the same as physical pain. Shame is the threat of being unlovable. And when we experience a setback, the first casualty is self-trust. Dr. Brene Brown, she's another really, really important healing worker that we have nowadays. If you guys are looking for additional resources, I would definitely look into some of the books she has written and some of her work. She's phenomenal with trauma and healing and shame. But the reason why I'm tying her into that is because if someone's primary inner thought is shame, I'm embarrassed, I am not good enough, when you come to the table and you're working with them, that no matter what you're saying, their inner thought is already saying that. So if you even semi-close to kind of mirror that same thought of like, oh, this work is so bad, all you're doing is triggering that same inner thought of shame, I'm not good enough, right? And so we want to be very, very mindful of our actions, our words, and how we interact with other people. So one really popular intervention that we use in therapy, but also just kind of like knowing everyday life. I have 2 children myself, 7 and 9, and they both know this cognitive, the perks, or maybe not perks, of having a therapist mom. But we talk about the cognitive triad, maybe not in that exact language, but we talk about how our thoughts impact our feelings and emotions, which impact our behaviors. So an example I use is if we are walking into a group meeting or work break room, let's use work break room. We walk into the work break room. As soon as we walk in, everyone starts laughing. There's a group of people, they start laughing. Our thought is, oh my gosh, they're laughing at me, which would then create a feeling, right? We're gonna start feeling embarrassed. We're gonna start feeling nervous, or maybe even angry, right? And then next comes our behavior. We might approach them, we might say, hey, what are you laughing at? What's funny? You would have maybe a more aggressive behavior. But if we change kind of that thought and say, well, maybe when I walked in, someone said something funny, it changes our feelings, right? Our feelings no longer embarrassed or angry. We're more maybe inquisitive, like, hey, I want to know the joke, like, tell me. So your response, your behavior is going to be different. You're going to kind of maybe approach it with a different attitude. So this is important in healing work because we want to make sure that when we're working with people, kind of knowing that their thoughts are what impact their behaviors. So again, kind of going back to the beginning, when we have irritability or anger, that sometimes is stemming from that thought, maybe that shame, maybe that guilt, maybe feeling bad, maybe they just had a bad day. Their behavior will be different based on what they're thinking. Okay. So in a recap, Today we kind of talked about, and I know this was a lot, guys, so I do apologize. I try to fit it all in as much as possible, but I think everything was pretty important for us to discuss. So we talk about recapping, trauma can continue to cause both emotional and physical symptoms for many years after the event has concluded. We want to remember that trauma bonding is an attachment to the abuser. And so what we mean by trauma bonding is that during that time of trauma, the people can become attached to the abuser. And so that's their safety, that's their constant. And so sometimes what we see is like kids, right, in a foster care system, if they have been abused by their parents or caregivers, they still have that attachment. They still want to go back. They still believe that their parent is their best option. And sometimes we know that that's not always the case, right? But they have built that attachment because it's what they know. And so by taking away that attachment, by telling them, no, that's not a good relationship, sometimes you'll see this trauma bond where they're going to protect their abuser. Okay. We want to know our limitations and scope of practice. We want to know that trauma-informed care is the intention of being mindful of your actions and how they trigger someone's trauma. And then again, it's not our job to convince someone to change. It's our job to encourage them to hope and then empower them to be able to believe they can. And we want to not unravel a person's history if we don't have the resources to do so. We are not equipped to open someone's trauma unless we are in a position to extend long-term extensive trauma therapy. And then at the end, I put in bold, the most important rule is to ensure we're not creating more harm. So really, if you take anything from tonight, I think that that would be it. You know, when we're working in this field, being mindful and just, and here's the other thing, mistakes happen. Sometimes things slip. Sometimes we say the wrong thing. We get nervous or we don't know how to respond. It's okay, but we just want to make sure that our behavior then models that. Hey, you know what? Last week I said something that probably wasn't so sensitive. I want to apologize to you for saying that. And so really it goes a long way in this field if we can create that sense of safety. Okay. And that's it. That's all I've got. Does anyone have any questions?
Can you show us the first slide?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Which, this one?
That one.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent job. It was a lot of really good information.
Very good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Very good, and you explained it very well. It wasn't too difficult to keep up.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah. I don't know how to stop sharing my. Oh, there it is.
Erika, this is Susan. I have a question. First of all, your presentation was outstanding. And my question is this, I know there are church groups that there are survivors who want to go to church. So they want to bring them to church, you know, which is great that they want to do that. But in my mind, they need to get training from somebody like you or, a nonprofit on the kinds of things you covered today so they don't unwittingly, exploit them. Like you said, get on Facebook and said, oh, I took this, survivor to church with me and name them, call them out or something, or just a survivor. They don't want to be called out. But just the thing about, one of the things that someone brought up to me is trauma bonding isn't, the abuser does it to manipulate them. But sometimes I've heard that what advocates have done, these people are taking them to church, is they feel that the survivor will feel safer if they share their own traumas. So they say, oh, I went through domestic violence when I was, so that they, think that, they're trying to find common ground with them. But it's my understanding when you do that, you're triggering them and then they wind up triggering you. So you're trauma bonding, not for the purpose of trying to manipulate them, but you're pulling each other into each other's pain, where isn't it really the job of the advocate to kind of create normal, to be there and talk about TV shows and church and God, and so they get a break from all this stuff, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I think if you'll notice throughout my presentation, I put in there at least, it might have overdone it, but I put in there like 4 or 5 times, knowing our scope
Limitations,
of practice and our limitations. And so absolutely, by bringing up our own trauma, sometimes we think that we're normalizing that we've been through hard things too. Right. And that's the way we're taught to engage with people.
Right.
We want to share experiences, and it creates
exactly. We feel we're being empathetic.
Yes, but with trauma, it's absolutely the opposite. And so you're right. You can be triggering a wound that that can run very deep, and you wouldn't necessarily even know until it's too late.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking I don't know if you're the person to ask, but I'm trying to find someone who will do a training for advocates that, I can invite, or maybe I have a YouTube channel, have a presentation or whatever. So they get an idea of the major do's and don'ts. I'm saying, like, something short, and then they can use whoever maybe they're partnering with and ask them for a training, but just to give them a heads up, because they kind of walk in very naive. I mean, you got a tremendous amount of training, but the average person off the street winds up making a lot of mistakes that, with the best of intentions. Like telling them, we'll pray over this, and if you don't get it, you didn't have enough faith or something.
That's one of the dangerous ones within the church, is like,
exactly. And there's lots of them. Right. And there's lots of them like that, because a lot of these survivors don't believe in God, which is understandable. And to let them find God. I know this woman, she was outstanding. She helped homeless youth, and her motto was relationship before religion. Meaning she became their friend, offered them services, and eventually they would come around and they want to go to church, but she let them do it at their own pace and never made them wrong, never, for how they felt about God or, all of it.
Yeah. So kind of going back to answer your question, I think that definitely I would recommend, if any kind of group. I've actually even led trauma-informed care with my church, my home church, with outreach teams that go feed homeless or hand out food pantries. It's really definitely important to know these things. But I would also tell you that another cool resource, if you don't have access to someone that directly, I know DMH, LA County Department of Mental Health has a specific program, and I don't know all the details, so you would have to go online, but they will dispatch one of their clinicians out to provide trauma-informed care trainings to churches and outreach programs. So that's another avenue to maybe explore if that's what you're seeking.
Now you said it's the Department of Mental Health. And what was the division? You named some initials.
I don't know the division, or it's so I'll put it here in the chat.
You said DBH.
No, Department of Mental Health is for
DMA.
Oh, where'd she go?
Oops, sorry guys.
No, it's going to take you a minute to put in the chat. It's fine.
So Department of Mental Health, this is LA County. So I would go on their website, and then you can, there's ways you can get in contact with them. I'm not sure what unit. I don't work for LA County. I work for San Bernardino. I'm sure we probably have something similar as well. I just am not too aware of what's out there. But yeah, even connecting with local nonprofits. So if you know, I know we have Project Sister here, maybe reaching out to them, maybe reaching out to Everyone Free, or if you have a connection to a therapist in your circle, maybe asking them if not all of them are trauma-informed specialists. So that's something to be kind of aware as well. And just kind of being mindful of.
Well, it's good to know that they have someone who'll come out to churches. That's fantastic because, it's not just human trafficking. I mean, people have suffered through incest, domestic violence. I mean, there's being bullied. There's tons of trauma, tons of it,
Absolutely.
especially in the Black community. I'm working with them and we're really focusing on how, having trauma-informed churches.
Yeah. It's really important. I think specifically churches could really benefit from this knowledge.
Right.
Because people are coming typically when they're broken, when they're at rock bottom, when they've been wounded or been hurt. And I don't think there's anything worse than church hurt and church trauma. And so having that information kind of widely available so that we can make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yes. Thank you. You really did an outstanding job.
Thank you. Is there any?
We have a question in the comments. Would you be willing to share this presentation when we're done?
Yes, I can definitely share it. I don't own the rights to all of the information shared, so I'm going to put that out there. I tried to quote as best as possible, but I've been out of school for a while, so I don't. I tried to cite my sources. But yes, you can definitely share this.
Can you just email it to Tamiko?
Yes, I'll do so after. And then I know Project Sister mentioned that they're going to have the live presentation posted on their YouTube. And so we'll be able to kind of pull that back up for reference as well. Because I know I kind of ad-libbed some.
The previous sessions should be on there already, and we'll be uploading this as soon as we can. Hopefully by tomorrow, but at the very latest by Monday or Tuesday. So it'll be online for you guys to look at and review.
All right. Well, thank you guys for letting me join. I love the work you're doing, and if I can be of any more assistance, please. Tamiko has my information as well. But I'm so proud that we have, people that are spending their Thursday evening on another Zoom after a long work day. And, it shows your commitment and your willingness to sacrifice for the work you're doing. And so that's a beautiful thing. And it kind of goes into, enriching our knowledge as we work in this field.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erika.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for being here. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Tamiko, for putting this together.
Have a good night.
All right. Good
Night.
night.
Night. Bye.
I'll hang on for a second if anyone needs the Zoom. No? Okay. Bye.
Bye.